Hi, everyone, and welcome to our third installment of the Let's Lock It Down series. My name is Cameron Lockman, and I'm a consultant on ATC's Delta Team. What does that mean? Delta Team here at ATC are part client account managers, part project managers, and overall solution seekers. We work hard to find the exact right solution for our clients, leveraging our expertise, our Delta process, and leaning on our strong network of provider partnerships. We appreciate you all taking time to join us today and hear a little more about what's going on in the cybersecurity space. We plan to do these webinars every 2 months. So the next one will be Thursday, January 18th, 2024. 2024, yeah, it's here, almost here. After the webinar today, you'll receive a follow-up email questionnaire and a link to register for the next session. And we absolutely appreciate your feedback, so please keep it coming. Before I go any further today, I'd like to introduce my teammate, another Delta Team consultant at ATC, Chris Groh.
Thanks, Cameron. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Cameron mentioned my name is Chris Groh, another consultant here at ATC. And before diving into the topic today, I wanted to mention there's a Q&A section at the bottom of the webinar. So please feel free to submit any questions that you have throughout the webinar today. We'll do our best to continue to move on, and if it makes sense, we'll go ahead and answer it right there, or at the very least, we'll address the questions at the end. So Cam gave a little bit of a brief overview of ATC. I'll dive a little bit deeper since maybe not everyone's familiar with us here on the call. We're an independent IT consulting firm. We focus and help our clients with their digital transformation in 4 core areas: voice, network, cloud, and security. We're provider neutral and we're solution agnostic. So we're not focused on any specific provider, and we're able to match your specific needs with the perfect solution. That's our goal every time. And we help our clients navigate the increasingly complex technology landscape with our technical expertise and our large portfolio of providers that we have access to.
So following our last webinar, we did a survey, which is our normal routine, to hear from you, and it helped us determine what we were going to talk about today. You all want to talk about pen testing or penetration tests. So what are they? What do they include? What elements should be considered? We'll cover all those questions and some others to help provide you information and advice to help you learn why, when, and how you'd go about executing a pen test. So we'll start with the definition. Chris, at the very beginning, what's a pen test?
Sure. Pen test, otherwise known as a penetration test, is an authorized simulated cyber attack on a computer system, and this is meant or performed to evaluate how secure that system actually is. These are performed by ethical hackers. However, rather than using their skills for malicious activity, they're going to use that to help test the security of a system and beef up that security for a company. And the goal is to simulate a real-world attack. Since they have similar tools and expertise to cyber criminals, they can try and breach in-scope systems, and just like a real-life attack would occur. The analogy here is, if you're completely new to pen test, a good analogy is a bank hires a burglar to try and break in and gain access to their vault. From there, you have lessons learned. Where are we most vulnerable? Where can we shore up our security? So that's exactly what's happening. However, it's with your systems and your networks, and we'll go into all the different things that can be tested on. But that's what a pen test is.
And that term, ethical hacking, hasn't always existed, right? Pen tests actually go back to the 70s, back when the first computer systems were coming online. It was actually the government that commissioned the first study to assess the security of their systems. So that study was known as red team, blue team exercise. And many of you are probably familiar with that if you're into pen testing in the security world. The red team is the attacking team, the one who attempts to penetrate the defenses of a systems team, which is the blue team, who's responding to those and trying to identify vulnerabilities. So in the 80s and 90s, right, computer usage and networks just became more widespread. Businesses implemented networks, and the need for security just continued to grow. But it wasn't really until the early 2000s that term ethical hacking came to be. So that was going to describe the practice of using, skills and techniques that not ethical hackers or hackers would use to gain access to systems. And today, pen tests are an integral or sometimes primary part to people's security strategies. So we'll talk more about, why they're required and, what you would benefit from doing a pen test. So types of pen tests, right? People probably think about network services as maybe the only, or if you're kind of new to it, the primary type of pen test. So in a network services pen test, you're just attempting to access resources across the company's data network, right? The main purpose is to identify the most exposed vulnerabilities and security weaknesses on your network infrastructure. So servers, firewalls, switches, routers, printers even, workstations, really any connected device. And with the increase in remote work and reliance on cloud-based resources, the attack vector is totally different than what it used to be, right? It's increased exponentially.
Yeah, that'll be a theme, I think, throughout this whole webinar is that attack surface, the attack vectors are continuously growing. Your risk is continuous. And so this isn't a set it and forget it approach. This is a longer, what is your security posture and what is your plan moving forward into the future?
Right. Hackers are playing offense.
Yeah.
Right. So the best way to combat them is with a strong defense, but also to be aware of everything that they're doing. Web application testing. So that focuses on the web apps that many companies use to run their businesses, including all the infrastructure, servers, applications, database components. Wireless pen tests, really similar to network services, but focused on the company, a business Wi-Fi. So think about devices that are connecting to the business Wi-Fi, laptops, tablets, smartphones, IoT devices, really anything that could connect to the Wi-Fi. So it really makes you consider who you're giving access to your wireless network, right, as a corporation.
Another thing that's ever growing to kind of emphasize that.
Totally different, right? It's not just good enough to have a corporate Wi-Fi and a guest Wi-Fi. You have to really lock those down and segregate the environments. Then also validate that what you've done is working the way you would expect. Social engineering, a lot of people don't think of this as a pen test, but phishing campaigns with targeted emails, not loaded with malicious code, being sent to internal resources to see what types of links people will follow, where they'll go. Also, targeted phone calls. That's kind of an interesting one where, you've probably heard a story of attempted hacker or even a hacker contacting an AP department, impersonating a vendor or supplier, trying to redirect payment for a major service or order. Also, physical penetration testing. So that's maybe not as much as common in the IT world, but it's very real, where people are trying to breach physical security barriers, trying to get into buildings. And once you're inside a building or a company's organization, you have a lot more access to things that you wouldn't if you're outside. Also, one that's kind of similar to physical is media dropping, where people might have a prepared USB stick with malicious code on it. They might drop those inside your organization or nearby to see if someone will pick it up and plug it into a system and compromise it that way. So lots and lots of ways to attempt, through the social engineering and the physical side to breach people who are our greatest resource, right? But also our biggest threat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think these are ordered in a way it's like what you think of first when you might think of pen tests or the common examples of it. But again, putting shining a light on the attack vectors and your risk is continually growing. Another way that they can be differentiated, these pen tests, are by the level of knowledge and access that the testers granted prior to the test taking place. So these will be called black box, white box, and gray box tests. You might hear different names, opaque or transparent, clear, blind. There's all sorts of names for it. We'll stick with black, white, and gray for today. And a black box, also known as blind testing, is when the attacker is given little to no knowledge about the in-scope system outside of what's publicly available. So this is going to most closely resemble that real-world attack of the average hacker trying to breach your system.
So if that's blind, right? Then you've heard double blind,
Yep.
right? Where was double blind?
So double blind is the covert test down here. We'll jump into that briefly, but it's where even the security personnel within your company are unaware of the attack going on. So, and that's really too short to understand the security posture that you have, and if you are breached, if you are attacked, what does that actually look like? So the black box is that blind testing, no information, simulating a true or simulating a real world attack, trying to gain access to a given system. The opposite end of that spectrum is the white box testing. This is basically an open book or an assumed breach test where the tester is given full access to the target system. So think source code, whitelisting, network architecture, different levels of access with different levels of permissions. So a little bit of everything. And this is for testers to find a way, if they were able to breach a system, what can they exploit? What sort of damage they can do once, kind of with that east-west traffic versus north-south, what sort of damage can they do once they've breached the system?
So you provide that information so that you can determine once somebody gets in or if they get in, assume they have all your information, right? Mm-hmm. What can they do with it?
Right. And then the last one is the gray box, as you might have guessed, it's somewhere in between. So maybe they have access of a standard user, maybe a privileged user, maybe they have some information about the system design or architecture, but not everything and not nothing. So there's pros and cons to each of these methodologies. Otherwise, only one would exist. But if they all three exist and they're all used, there's pros and cons to each one. So again, kind of sticking with that theme of it's important to scope and have a reason to do this. There are trade-offs with this. So whether it's speed, efficiency, cost, or coverage, we're going to talk about scoping a pen test, but that's really going to help you, understand what those trade-offs might be.
Well, you can learn a lot when you give someone read-only credentials or end-user type credentials to a system, to determine if a hacker could elevate privileges to further gain access beyond what's acceptable. Right. That's real common. Great box. External versus internal. This is very straightforward, right? This is basically your firewall or your edge devices or your determine the attack vector. So if it's just outside firewall, so website, DNS, that type of thing, and internal is everything inside your organization.
That covert test is that double blind test. So covert, the tester doesn't know, or I'm sorry, black box testing, the tester doesn't have any prior information. Covert, the tester and the subject, the company, don't have information.
So they don't know when it's happening, who's doing it, where the attack is coming from.
Yep.
That's primarily run by upper management to test their teams.
Yep, and most importantly, the security personnel responsible for responding to the threat are unaware to really test that. So that's what is a pen test and the different types. Cam, tell us a little bit about what is not a pen test and some other tests.
Yeah, so what is a pen test and what is not a pen test is important to understand because a lot of folks think, can you go back? Yeah, so vulnerability scanning, right? That's proactive cybersecurity practice aimed at assessing your current security posture. So this isn't really offensive. This is just to identify weaknesses. Lots of organizations, lots of third parties will do a free vulnerability scan. It's not something you generally pay for. It's not something that is going to be super, super in-depth. It's going to scan for open ports and other potential vulnerabilities, and possibly places where people can gain access to your systems. The bug bounty program, that's a little interesting. It's a deal offered by companies or websites or developers where individuals, third parties outside their organization can receive recognition and compensation for reporting bugs, especially if it's related to security or vulnerabilities. That's really a forward-thinking approach to have that out there. Super, super helpful if it's, people are aware that their code could potentially become compromised and they're willing to accept that feedback from folks. A tabletop exercise. So this is a verbally simulated scenario that mimics a real cybersecurity incident which could have damaging impact to your business continuity. So the point of this is really to help identify who the stakeholders are, what their roles and responsibilities are in the event there's a cyber incident. People don't want to think about a cyber incident, right? So doing a tabletop exercise where it's a trusted third party that can sit with you and walk you through it, huge benefits to really understanding that. Who's going to respond? How are they going to respond? And what do we do about it? What's the worst case scenario and how do we respond?
Right.
A security assessment really can be used interchangeably with vulnerability scan. And then security policy review, that's a little bit different. That's usually a third party will come in and help understand and analyze your security policies.
Okay.
Everything inside your organization to shore up your policies.
So there's all sorts of tests and exercises and assessments that can be done here. Another thing we'll continue to hit on, but there's a time and a place for all of them. They all serve their purpose, and it's not back to finding the right solution, which we try and do. There's a time and a place for each of these assessments or tests.
Yep, absolutely.
So how are these conducted, these pen tests?
Yeah, so pen test goes way beyond vulnerability scanning, right? It's not just being aware of systems and where attack vectors or where there could be a breach, but it's really scanning using multi-step and multi-vector attack scenarios to find vulnerabilities and to attack them. So that starts with reconnaissance, right? It's planning, it's trying to understand where are the systems most vulnerable, what can be breached, where does information lie which is potentially valuable. How am I going to get through and what am I going to do? How am I going to gain that access? So that could be social engineering. It could be picking up information about the company online, non-intrusive scanning. So vulnerability scanning and those tools can be used by malicious third parties the same as they can by kind of the white hat side. Even like dumpster diving, people talk about that, like picking up physical information about a company. You can do that. It helps pen testers really target the attack surface and determine how they're going to attack. So next, scanning or strategizing, they use that information they collected to go after the system in the weakest areas, right? Figure out how they can take one step and then potentially move east, west, north, south, how they can get closer to the systems or the data. They use a variety of tools and mechanisms to do that. And it's all things that they learned based on their recon. Then they gain access to systems, right? So pen testing is a lot like software acceptance testing, where they're going to do test cases. They're going to try different things to see how the systems respond. And they're going to record those results, and they're going to use that information to take their next steps. So they're understanding the best tools and techniques to make the next step, whether it's through a weakness that could be exploited through SQL injection or malware, social engineering, or another way.
And that scanning that they're doing is going to help them prioritize the most logical or most probable ways that they can breach a system, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So maintaining access, this is the one that admins don't want to think about, right? Once the system has been breached, what are they going to do? How long are they going to stay? What are they going to take? Different providers quote different response times. We've heard, on average, a system has been breached for 246 days before the attack is actually mitigated or executed on. So people get into your systems and they stay there, or they want to do the maximum damage possible for their own gain. So it's about, when you're maintaining access during a pen test, it's about demonstrating potential impact. So you want to show people, this is where I am, this is what I have access to, and here's what I can do with it. Withdrawing. So hackers want to leave without being noticed, right? They want to get out of the system, leave some breadcrumbs behind where they could potentially come back and do more damage. And then analysis and review, that's really what's important to make sure you've gotten the maximum value out of your pen test, going through, the results of the test.
And we're going to dive a little bit deeper on analysis review here in
Yep.
a couple slides.
I kind of covered these. So we're going to go, they basically are going to use software tools and techniques to gain information. And then once they've, gotten to the point where that's as far as they can get, they're going to put hands on keyboard and manually get in there and breach the systems.
All right, so why would you perform a pen test? I think the most obvious answer here is to prepare for a potential attack. You want to identify the most critical security vulnerabilities in the given system that you're trying to test. And these tests serve as a way or examples, tangible examples for what your security posture actually is. And it's going to help you budget priorities accordingly. Budget those a time and a money perspective, because we'll say this a few times, but you can't address everything all at once. There's going to be a lot of deliverable. Not everything can be done all at once, and not everything can be done immediately. So you have to prioritize these, and then you can proactively remediate those high priority security issues. So those are kind of the obvious reasons why you might perform a pen test. Also compliance. So if you if you need to be fully compliant with PCI or HIPAA, any regulations like that, oftentimes a pen test is a requirement of that.
Those are industry-based, right? So if you're in banking or healthcare or another financial services industry, those are going to be, pen tests aren't necessarily the only vehicle to maintain or to achieve compliance, but they're a good way to test it and retain it.
Or cyber insurance companies, it could be required by them. So if you're in the market, that might be a requirement even to get coverage, or you could also save money on your premiums by performing a pen test. And that's you're proving you're taking proactive steps to mitigate risk, which would encourage or would cause those savings on your premiums. So who should get one? The easy answer, and what we're trying to get away from, is everyone should get one. You should get a pen test because you need a pen test. That's not an acceptable answer. It's kind of that last highlighted bullet point at the end. But if you're having major changes to an application, system, or network that might affect that security or the security of those items, or you're moving something into production status, you're in a highly regulated industry, think banks or healthcare, or you're dealing with sensitive information. Those are some companies that might be, should be considering penetration testing, as well as small and medium businesses. Unfortunately, hackers aren't out there saying things like that's out of scope or that business is too small. Like it's just not the world we live in. And so small and medium businesses are often more high priority targets for cyber criminals. So
they're seen as low hanging fruit, right?
Yeah.
They're easier to breach because their controls are not as well developed, right? And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so just the key thing here is making sure it's tied to that specific business objective or strategy. There's a lot of different types. There's a lot of different reasons, but to maximize that ROI, you should be thinking about the bigger picture, beginning with that end in mind when you're doing a pen
One
test.
thing we didn't say on here is when to get a pen test, right? We talked a little bit about some of the other tests that are out there. So pen test might not be where you start, right? You may need to shore up your security posture first. If you know you have gaps, a pen test may not be the best way to address those gaps initially, right? You might want to shore up your security first, and then do a pen test once you think you're in better shape. So how do we scope a pen test? So scoping, really, we've kind of covered it too already. It talks about applications, users, networks, devices, accounts, and other assets, which should be considered as part of your resources that would be in scope for a pen test. The big thing here, everything else that's on here, it has to be tied to a strategy or objective, right? Nothing else matters if it's not tied to a specific business outcome. So it's very, very important. The rest of this is kind of pales in comparison, right? It can be focused, granular. Cost effective doesn't necessarily mean cheap, right? Cost effective means the dollars you're putting behind it are going to derive the value that you need from this test, right? And then scheduled, right? What's the duration of a test? Some are 3 days, some are 7 days, some are much longer, depending on the importance of the system or the size of the system or the attack vector, really. Remediation, every vendor who does a pen test is going to have a remediation plan, right? And they're going to want you to hire them for that remediation plan as well. Or they're going to turn things back over to you or work alongside you. And some will include a retest. Some insurance carriers will, or compliance organizations will require that you retest once you've identified, those systems that have weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And honestly, you don't want lessons documented to stay that way, right? You want them to be lessons learned. I've learned this, I've implemented it, and now when I retest, I know I'm going to be in better shape.
So let's talk about those what now steps after here. So Cam, kick us off on this one, and we'll get to the wrap up and Q&A.
Yeah. So at the end, you want to review and discuss, right? Your leadership has spent money to do a pen test. You want to make sure that you've gotten the value out of it. So this executive summary is a good place to start. It's higher level. It's going to show you the major vulnerabilities, the things you need to address right away. And this isn't a scary thing, right? This isn't telling your bosses how poor of a job you're doing. This is just notifying them that, hey, we have some gaps. Right? These are things we didn't see as an organization, and now we're aware of them. So now we have to do something about it. And then, technical and vulnerability reports be much more detailed, have specifics about when a system was breached, how it was breached, what to do about it, would be then in the remediation report.
And we mentioned it, but these reports are going to have invaluable information and take a lot of time to get through. So planning this pen test post-mortem, maybe before you even start the pen test, would be a good idea, because you can't just, like Cameron said, get it done and then just have it as lessons documented. It's about implementing those and actually putting those remediation plans into action. They're going to help you prioritize your vulnerabilities and attack that either low-hanging fruit or where you're most vulnerable quickly, and then work through that priority list.
You want to begin with the end in mind, right? You don't know what you're going to find along the way, but you know where you want to end up.
I think the last thing here too, and I know you wanted to talk about the MSSP, but a fresh set of eyes is always a good idea in terms of, maybe switching up who's doing your penetration testing. If you're doing it on an annual basis or whatever it may be, getting a new perspective on that is a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is just a funny image that has been floating around for quite some time. There's a couple of different paths to being a security consultant. So you can take that for what it's worth. And then we'll just wrap up here.
All right. So again, we want to thank everyone for joining our latest webinar on the Let's Lock It Down series. We hope you learned something. Look out for a follow-up email coming from ATC Marketing. There will be the registration for that January 18th webinar that we have coming up. And please send us your future webinar topics in that response to that email coming out after this. It's how we continue to develop what we're going to talk about. That's how this topic was chosen. And if you want to talk more about cybersecurity, just have an open dialogue about it. Please reach out to us. No commitments or anything like that. If you'd just like to have that conversation. I was monitoring the chat, so I didn't see anything come through, but now's a good time. We have a couple minutes if you had a question, but there's nothing in the chat at the moment.
Yep. So it's really a conversation, right? We want to be open with you, and we're constantly talking with providers out there. So whether it's finding someone who will do a low cost or no cost assessment to kind of see where you start, or if you already know, like I need a pen test done, like we can get those executed quickly. We work with literally dozens of providers who do penetration testing. So we're good at finding the right ones for you and matching up with them. So we appreciate your time. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.